welcome to episode number 74 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Tempty. Today we've got Mina Morris joining us as our guest in this special episode to wrap up our last three mini-series on the future skills of financial acumen, business acumen, and data literacy. Mina is partner Human Capital Solutions at Aon and has a wide range of experience in talent management, assessment, analytics, and corporate training. Thank you so much for sharing your talents and insights with us today, Mina.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. It's a pleasure.
Well, you're joining us from New York out there, and we're here in Wisconsin. It's a cold and kind of dreary day here. What's the weather like for you?
Yeah, it's about the same, maybe not as cold, but we had a kind of a cold snap during the holiday period here. So it's nice to be on the other side of that.
Yes, it is. So, Mina, before we get started, I ask this question of all our guests. It would be great if you told our listeners your story.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm a partner with Aon's Human Capital Solutions practice. I work with clients to implement large sort of workforce transformation programs focused on talent. So really that involves thinking about how to identify, measure, assess talent, develop leaders, and really kind of think about setting up the infrastructure around jobs and how that could translate, sort of a business strategy into an effective HR strategy. If I sort of step back, my background has been in organizational psychology. So that's centered around the science of people at work. And you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not originally from the US. I grew up in New Zealand. And actually my parents immigrated to New Zealand from Egypt. So I was a first generation immigrant in New Zealand. And that really kind of sparked that piece around trying to understand people better. I was sort of growing up in an Eastern culture, in a Western country, and that sort of, like at an early age, just got me interested in what makes people tick and really kind of got me interested in that space. And then when it came time to sort of pick a career, I sort of then kind of went back to that angle around sort of people and science and human capital. So spent a bit of time working in New Zealand. Then my career has sort of taken me to working in Asia and the Middle East for a while, and now I'm in North America.
What a path! What a path that is. Very, very impressive. I after the show, I want to pick your brain. I'm going to be recording my Saturday morning muse right after this, and we're going to be talking about kind of beginning of year biases in leaders and how they think that everything is going to be a lot better than the run rate that they just experienced in the fourth quarter. That somehow things are going to miraculously be on a hockey stick. So we'll chat about that later.
Sure.
If you had to pick one event in your life that was just put rocket boosters behind your career, what would that event be?
Yeah, so I think from the perspective of the experiences I've had, I've been very lucky to have a number of amazing career experiences that have helped sort of elevate my career growth and learning. But I think one that stands out is my first role out of college, where I worked for a boutique consulting firm in New Zealand. And I'll give the founder a shout out. His name was Dave Winsborough, and Dave really mentored me around the idea of the soft skills or the behavioral skills that you need to be successful at work. And when you leave college, you have this amazing kind of portfolio of technical skills that you feel the world is ready to see and experience. And they've really helped me think about how to communicate better at work, how to really think about delivering your message with clarity, how to be more pragmatic and practical. And so that experience is something that I've kind of remembered for the rest of my career. Is not just about what you do, it's about how you do it as well.
Oh, that's a fantastic lesson for our listeners. Now, before we get into the our wrap up of these skills that we're talking about today, I would venture to guess that many of our listeners are unaware that Aon is in the assessment business, as you know, the main brand screams insurance. Can you spend just a few moments updating us on what Aon does for corporations around the world and what the flagship product really is?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I think most people would associate the Aon brand with maybe risk or insurance products, but actually, Aon is a $12 billion company that has a portfolio of different solutions, and it's all under the umbrella of helping clients empower results. So there's a risk element to that. There's kind of a health and well-being element to that. There's helping organizations think about their wealth solutions, and then there's the piece that my team is focused on, which is around human capital solutions and really thinking about the HR pieces of the puzzle. And kind of the link there is if you think about the risks that organizations are facing, and we kind of do these annual surveys, and quite often you'll see sort of top 10 risks highlighted by an organization, and 7 or 8 out of those risks would actually be people-centered risks. Mm. So if you think about things like cybersecurity, for example, at the heart of it is actually a people challenge or a people issue. So we find that those services are sort of interrelated when we speak to clients, and so within the human capital business, we sort of think about helping clients through data and advice, think about ways in which they can better deliver their business strategy and minimize risk. And to your question, maybe about flagship product, one piece of the puzzle, if you like, is a personality assessment tool that we use with clients called Adept 15, and that helps us understand personality traits at work and help clients see data and help individuals sort of get data on themselves to better understand how they work within a work environment.
Well, thank you for that update. Adept 15, what's the closest competitor to that? Just for our listeners to kind of triangulate.
Yeah, I mean, if listeners are familiar with measurements of the Big Five personality model, and there are a number of tools on the market that center around that model. Adept 15 is similar in that regard. Is that based on the kind of the research that identifies big personality traits at work, and then looks to sort of report out on dimensions related to that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. In my first book, Balancing Act, I list these 4 skills as essential tools for all workplace participants in the future. They are human skill, which is a portfolio of emotional intelligence, communication, all manner of things that make us who we are. And the second is financial acumen. The third is business acumen. And the fourth is data literacy. And we've had miniseries on financial acumen, business acumen, and data literacy over the last few months. If you had to rank them in order of importance from your vantage point, what order would you put them in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a slightly sort of tricky question because I think all of them are quite important. I would say, what you've described under the umbrella of sort of human skills, I think that kind of tends to apply in most roles, in most environments, that there's an element of thinking about what we would call maybe core competencies or core skills that are just how we relate to each other as humans, how we sort of work together, communicate, collaborate. So I think that sort of umbrella is definitely prominent in most jobs and in most environments. Then it becomes a matter of just sort of thinking more about the specific role and that specific environment, what's important. So, for example, if you have a role that's more oriented towards problem solving with business information, then obviously your business acumen skills and competencies might be more important. If you have something that's leaning a bit more towards the financial side, then maybe that's a bit more important. So it just probably depends a bit more on the sort of the context, with probably that human skills umbrella on top.
Yeah. So Mina, we're going to take advantage of your expertise in the assessment world. In our previous miniseries, each of our previous guests have stressed the importance of experiential learning and assessment to gauge the installation of these skills, but we really haven't dived in on the assessment side. Let's start with financial acumen. Can you advise our listeners on the best way to assess the acquisition of financial literacy and acumen within teams?
Yeah, sure. And maybe before we dive into that, Andy, maybe just maybe just taking a slight step back and just thinking about why it's important to sort of assess or understand a level of skill. And, I think for most people, why that's important is to sort of meet them where they are. So in other words, if you understand, the baseline of where someone is today, and assess that, then it helps you provide, more relevant feedback, more relevant interventions or training, and more relevant support to help them sort of nurture and develop that skill. So that's why I think, that piece around assessment is interesting, because it helps, baseline, teams and individuals within organizations. Now, thinking specifically about, financial acumen, the way I probably think about it is there's sort of two different aspects there. One aspect is working with numbers and financial information. And then the second aspect is probably more generally the ability to problem solve. So if we take the first aspect first, which is thinking about, how to assess or understand the baseline that someone has working with numbers of financial information, the easiest way I can kind of probably relate to this is, if you give someone a sample of a problem that they need to solve for and check on the level of how they do that, that allows you to sort of correct or understand that level. So in other words, we call them job sample tests, but it's basically this idea of you take a small sample of the financial problems or elements that are required. So for example, reading a balance sheet or analyzing a P&L statement, or even more fundamentally, just sort of working with numbers. And you give someone a sample of that problem, and in most instances, you time them, but you don't have to. Sometimes these assessments can be untimed, and really sort of see the level of speed and accuracy that they have in understanding and solving those problems. So that gives you kind of the domain understanding around sort of numerical and financial information. The second piece, which I mentioned, which is about more generally the ability to problem solve, quite often we would relate this to deductive and inductive reasoning. So if you think about this notion of deductive reasoning, where you start with a general assumption and then you apply some logic to reach a conclusion. So for example, silly example, but all racing cars must go over 80 miles an hour. A Dodge Charger is a racing car, therefore the car must go over 80 miles an hour. So that's, you've applied, deductive reasoning there, and that's quite often what you have to do when you're working with financial information. The other piece to that is, for example, inductive reasoning, where you get bits of data and you then broaden that out until you reach a general assumption or general conclusion. So, for example, when you're counting or you're just sort of adding things up, that's what you're doing with inductive reasoning. So, it's if I was to sort of break it down in how individuals and teams can understand this skill a little bit better, I would say some level of understanding the domain, and then some level of understanding the ability to problem solve.
I just love how you've broken that, what is a very difficult problem to solve, into really two component parts, and getting at the assessment of the skill from really two different angles. Many people would look at financial literacy and think that it's all about the numbers and all about the data and being able to build spreadsheets, but it's the understanding and we've talked about storytelling as well previously in the show as another skill that's just absolutely essential. So being able to assess critical thinking, critical reasoning, storytelling skills, all of that builds into that portfolio of assessing financial acumen. That's just awesome. What about business acumen? Business acumen is a bit more multifaceted than financial acumen. How would you advise our listeners to assess the acquisition of this key skill?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Andy, I think it's a bit more multifaceted to sort of think about business acumen because people describe and think about that as quite a broad domain. So I think the first thing to think about is zeroing in on the aspect of business acumen that you would consider to be important. So, for example, is it about understanding a business? Is it about understanding an industry or having some industry insights? Is it about sort of the more commercial side, negotiations, deals, etc.? So the first piece I'd say is just figuring out kind of the right platform to understand more about how that skill relates in your environment. And then, we see a lot of digital tools that replicate a virtual environment to be able to practice those skills or to test those skills. So, for example, if you're, kind of focused on the industry piece, there are ways in which you can kind of disseminate virtually using some tools and products, for example, industry trends, and then look to see how does the person interact with that information? What do they take away from it? What do they present back to you? Or kind of which information of those pieces do they take to problem solve? So there are ways in which we can simulate the skills required from a business perspective once we know which aspects of those are important.
Yeah, Mina, excellent advice. We're going to take a really short break for a commercial message here, and we'll be right back with Mina Morris. Thanks for listening to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Tempe. In my book, Balancing Act, Teach, Coach, Mentor, Inspire, I explore the characteristics required of leaders who must find balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and selflessness, passion and measure, and leadership and followership. Balancing Act is available today at Amazon.com. And we're back with Mina Morris in our special Future Skills Roundup. Mina, as it relates to data literacy, let's continue this conversation on how you would advise our listeners on the acquisition, on assessing the acquisition of this skill. But as you formulate your answer there, let's if you can also give some advice to our listeners around getting past the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that invariably accompanies the assessment of really any skill in a business environment. I would just love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, and the word assessment can be quite scary for a lot of people, and it's something that kind of just elevates the anxiety around what are you going to do with this information? What does it mean for my job? So there's always kind of a degree of uncertainty that comes with that. So the advice that we usually sort of center on is think about this as any change management initiative within your organization. So how would you address that? You'd be very clear on communication, you'd be very clear on intent. And, there's sort of some practical things to think about. Like, for example, if you're doing it within an organization, we always say start at the top. So if you're running a program, for example, make it visible, make it clear that, everybody in a certain business unit or a department is going through this process. And, start with the leaders on top so they see that they've already been through this process. It's not harmful. And then you sort of cascade it down. The other piece is just being very clear on communication. So, what is the data that's being generated? Who owns it? Who gets to see it? What decisions are being made with it? So those are all kind of things that are kind of hygiene factors that help, reduce the level of stress or anxiety. And then I think the piece around sort of the reports and the data and the outcome just needs to be crystal clear, like who owns the results? Like, the reports, for example, do they go to the manager? Do they go to HR? Do they go to the individual? That process needs to just be worked through and be made very clear. So I think those elements from a change perspective are critical to think about. Of course, there will be some resistance, so there's not kind of denying that. But yeah. I think you can really minimize the noise and and kind of gain a lot of buy-in if you follow some of those principles. I think as maybe we switch to sort of thinking about specifically about, data literacy, I think data is very interesting because I think we all have our experiences of working with data and our preferences. So some people are more visual, some people are more, numerical, some people are more verbal. So I think when it comes to assessing and understanding data, maybe a piece to think about here is understanding what preferences individuals have and what types of data they like to work with, because that gives you a strong, index to kind of anchor on. And we mentioned personality assessment and measurement a little bit earlier. That's actually a good way to think about data and how individuals work with data, because there's also the preference of, for example, are you a big picture person or are you more of a detail-oriented person? If you're a big picture person, you collect data and you want to see the overall trend. If you're more detail-oriented, you sort of want to dig into the details and understand, more intricate kind of connection points. So as we think about data, I think it's important to sort of think more holistically about preferences and people's orientation towards that, and acknowledging that, sometimes there's no one right answer. There's probably just different requirements and different skills for different jobs.
So as I've listened to you talk about the assessment design, really for all three of those skills, the word thoughtful really comes to mind. That it's not some cookie cutter off the shelf. You can certainly do that, and I'm sure there are assessments that abound that are cookie cutter off the shelf. But you're really suggesting that quite a bit of foresight, forethought into the process to really make sure that you don't just end up with garbage in, garbage out. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you really want to spend time to think about not only kind of the approach, which is actually probably the easiest part of rolling out, some of these aspects, but actually, stepping back and thinking, what is it that you want to measure? How is it that you're going to, use that data and kind of make decisions based on that data? What is the experience that we want to put individuals through? So all of those pieces are, I would say, just as important as the experience of sort of deploying an assessment process itself. And you're right, this just has to be a lot of thought that goes into those aspects.
Yeah, and if leadership is thoughtful about assessment, then the fear, uncertainty, and doubt will be, and the anxiety will be tamped down. I would imagine.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
because you're clear on the purpose, right? So you're clear on why you're doing it, right? And that kind of just shapes the whole narrative around the process.
Right. So, as someone who's played at the intersection of business and education, I love to give advice directly to educational leaders. What advice do you have for educational leaders in both secondary and post-secondary institutions to improve on the three skills that we're talking about here: financial acumen, business acumen, and data literacy?
I think, if I think about this, Andy, there's sort of different ideas that come to mind, but I think, something that I think a lot of your guests have spoken about previously is this idea of, the half-life or the shelf life of skills. So the first thing that comes to my mind is, we really need to educate ourselves and educate, future generations around learning to learn. And it's about this idea of, the skills that you learn are going to be relevant for 5 years, or if you look at the World Economic Forum, or if you look at, things coming out of like the software and kind of, computer industry and technology industry, it's under 2 years. So, this ability to constantly immerse ourselves and kind of assess ourselves and kind of learn new skills is going to be really, really important. And with that, the sort of second thought that comes to mind is I just call it the Netflix model. Netflix knows what you want to watch next, and they have their algorithm, and they customize the content that you see based on your profile. And I think we really need to get to that as we think about education and training, and some of the assessment aspects that we've spoken about relate to that. It's about personalization, it's about customization, it's about knowing that not one size fits all. And that's really, I think, a key aspect of it is knowing who I am as a person, what my skills are, where I'm lacking, where I need to develop, what my aspirations are, and then putting in front of me the right content that helps guide me on my journey and on my way.
I can directly attest to wanting to deliver the Netflix model of education in my previous role at Kaplan, and it's that level of predictability in a set of educational journeys is a devilishly difficult problem to solve for. I know it's early 2023 when we're recording this, so we are making significant progress in this regard, but it's still a tough problem to solve.
Yeah, and if you really sort of extend that logic of kind of that customization, what it really allows you to think about is how you democratize opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you think about, what organizations are thinking about, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, if you think about that from an educational standpoint and you learn to spot someone's potential really early on and customize a learning program or put in front of them learning content that's really, helpful for them, that allows you to, unleash and provide more opportunity to more individuals, right? So it's a very powerful tool if you sort of really extract that line and think about it with the impact it could have for society.
Yeah. So, Mina, as we begin to wrap things up, I'd like to give you an opportunity to push back on my identification of human skill, financial acumen, business acumen, and data literacy as top future-facing skills. If you put your own top 4 list together, would it contain anything different?
I mean, I think you've captured a lot of what organizations are feeling as very relevant from a future skills perspective. Maybe the only piece I'd add is if you double click on that human skill element of it, we're sort of seeing 2 elements come to the fore as we sort of work with organizations to put future skills models in place. One element that keeps coming up is this idea of resilience and how do you build resilience within a workforce? How do you build that ability to sort of take knocks, look after your own well-being, bounce back, bounce forward. So I think that element is just becoming so important because we know, times are, can be tough. We know that, challenges are, 2023, as you said, the world is not going to be, who knows, right? It's going to be unpredictable this year. So I think that ability to be resilient, especially on the back of the pandemic, is very important as a skill. The other piece that we see coming up quite a lot is curiosity. And, maybe we can relate that back to a human skill, but it's, about this idea of openness to learn, acquiring new skills, self-improvement, and individuals that possess that skill seem to be doing and flourishing a lot more. So probably those 2 aspects to maybe, add in the mix of what we think about.
Oh, bravo. Those were excellent additions, totally unprompted for the audience, by the way, but that was just perfect, Mina. So as we wrap things up, last question, what are you most excited about for your future at Aon Human Capital Solutions, Aon itself, and Mina Morris specifically? Where are you headed next?
Well, as you said, we're recording at the start of 2023, so it's going to be a very interesting year, I think. One of the things that we are really excited about is working with corporates to help them think about reskilling within corporates at scale. So that might be restructuring some of the roles, thinking about roles that are sunsetting, new age sort of roles and technologies that are coming up, and how to, sort of transform the workforce to be able to have career pathways into those roles. So, applying that Netflix model that we talked about. But that's really interesting because the old model that organizations used to have was, we sort of hire and fire, and now they're realizing that that's not just sustainable, especially in the current, labor market in the US. So that is very exciting to sort of work through that at scale with corporates. The other piece that's exciting is thinking about the well-being and resilience piece that we've talked about. Aon is focused on that space. We're developing a product that will come to market very shortly around sustainability and thinking about human impact and sustainability. So we're working to apply that within organizations. And so I'm excited about that. And, I think what's also sort of personally for me really exciting is just seeing human capital issues now being very relevant for CEOs and top executives. I think for a long time it's been paid sort of lip service, but now, if you see an article on Forbes or an interview on Bloomberg or something, you see CEOs talking quite predominantly about human issues and human capital issues. So I think for me that's just a very exciting, transformation and journey that's going on.
Oh, thank you for that, Mina. And thank you for your significant contributions to our listeners and to the show. I'm very, very appreciative. My name is Andrew Tempte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. We're available on all the major podcast services, as well as on YouTube. You can log on to YouTube and see our wonderful faces live and in person. So thank you all for joining us. And again, thank you, Mina, for being here. Please like, subscribe, rate, and share the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Andrew.